Now C++ was developed by one Bjarne Stroustrup in the Bell Laboratories. This is originally known as a language which includes classes with C. Like C++, most of the features, as we have seen in the previous sessions, like the tokens, the looping statements, the decision making statements, all of them mostly are similar to the programming language C. The only new introduction into the C++ is the use of object oriented concepts. So C++ is also known as C with classes. Two languages mainly contributed to its development. One is the basic features that are taken from the C language and the object oriented concepts that have been brought in from Simula 67. So C++ is the first language that took up this object oriented programming features and the features of the language C. Next we move over to classes in C++. So what is the definition of a class? A class is defined as a set of objects that share common structure and behavior. We already have seen that a class includes the class keyword, the class name, a class body, which has data members as well as member functions. So this is how the syntax of a class is defined. You have the keyword class and then you need to have a class name to differentiate between the classes. The class body starts with the opening brace and here you have something called access specifiers, which we will be seeing in detail. And here one function is defined, which is void 1, and you have the class body which ends with a closing brace followed by a semicolon. So this is just a skeletal view of how a class is generally declared and what consists in the body of a class. Now we will see in detail each of these parts of a class. First, coming to the class keyword. Now this class keyword is significant, it is a must when we define or declare a class. The braces need to indicate the start and end of a class body, and always when a class ends, a semicolon should follow the brace. That is the second point to be noted when we declare a class. So you need to have the keyword class and you need to indicate the body of the class by an opening and closing brace, and a semicolon needs to follow the closing brace of the class. Now this is just a syntactical representation of a class declaration. Next, the class name. A class name is highly essential because when we have two or more classes in one particular program, we have to differentiate between the classes based on the class name. So there are certain conventions which are recommended to be followed and which are needful to be followed, so that when we write large programs which have more than one class in the same program, it will make the program more meaningful and it will enable the programmer who writes the program as well as other users who read the program to understand the reason for which the program was written and how it actually executes to give the result. So first thing about the class name is it needs to be meaningful, relevant to the application. It's better if it is a noun, it should ideally be a noun because we are involving objects in the programming language. So it is easy to identify the characteristics that are involved in the program and give the class name accordingly. The first letter of every class name should be a capital letter so that it distinguishes it very clearly from the other terms that are used in the program, because inside classes you are followed by variables and then by member functions and so on. So when you make the class name start with a capital, it gives a more distinct view of the entire program. And if the class name contains more than one word, normally you do not have more than one word in a class name unless the program is really large and it is really necessary to make the class name meaningful. But generally in cases it all depends upon the programmer's point of view, because the person who is writing the program will have his own taste and his own view. So depending upon his liking, if he is going to include more than one word as a class name, it is always better to differentiate between the words by making the first letter a capital. Here is an example. One is where there is only one name, employee name, the first letter is a capital. The second is employee dependent, where E and D, two different, the first letters of two different words have been made as capital letters. So these are just conventions which need to be followed when we are giving a name to a class in a program. So there are certain rules which is a must to be followed when we write the class name. If these rules are not followed, the compiler which compiles a C++ program will return an error message. We will not be able to execute and get the result. It should not contain any space or symbols. The only symbol that is allowed is the underscore. and the class name must begin with a letter. It may be followed by a sequence of letters or digits or the underscore. And a keyword cannot be used as a class name. Now, if you see, most of these rules are similar to the naming of variables and identifiers in C++ as well as in C. So, generally itself, when we give a name, these are the rules that are generally followed in C++. And next we move over to the member functions, which form the constituent portion of the class, the components of the class. Now, before we define a member function, first we will see what is a function. This is just a recap. A function is a set of statements that perform a specific task in response to a certain call, a function call or a message or a request. And the functions of an object, when they are defined in C++, they are given a special technical term called member functions. So, when functions are declared or defined inside a class, they are called as member functions in C++. Now, this is a new term introduced here because class is a new concept introduced in C++. So, generally when we define functions in C, we just call them functions. But because here the concept of a class has been introduced and we are declaring functions inside the class, we give them a name called member functions. Member functions are declared inside the class body, but their definition, that is the body of the member function, can be defined inside the class or it can be defined outside the class. Both the programming paradigms can be followed. We will see an example in the coming slides. Variable names, variables which hold values, also are declared inside classes. They are called as data members. Another term that is used is member variables. So, functions which are declared within a class are called member functions. Variables which are declared inside a class are either called member variables or they are called data members.